Welcome everyone to IPM's weekly virtual forum this Friday, March 19th. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge all those around the world who are celebrating Father's Day today. I know when I lived in Italy, this was a really important day for all the dads and families there. And I know it's the same for many other parts of the Latin world, if you will. So happy Father's Day to all the dads out there, and happy day to all the Josephs out there as well. Today we are thrilled to continue our series with a particular focus this month in recognition of International Women's Day that took place earlier this month, and what is now known as Women's History Month, at least here in the United States, to continue our focus on the important work of women and girls around the world, not only those who are current IPM partners, but folks that we deeply respect and in many places have long-term relationships with, or former partners that continue to do really exciting and cutting edge and vital work on behalf and alongside women and girls around the world. Next week, we'll be joined by our newest colleague, Bindia, who those of you on Zoom can see, who will be speaking about her reality in Golana, India, following up on some of the conversations we've had the past couple of weeks, and her own really important work with IPM from our South Asian office. But today we're thrilled to be joined by a dear friend. I hesitate to use the word old, as she and I are both aging, but a dear old friend of IPM, Julie Lawson, who's been a CEO, author, speaker, entrepreneur, mentor, women's leadership development expert, pretty much everything you can imagine, and is really focused currently on developing resilient leaders and organizations. And you'll recall we've heard a lot, particularly from our Latin American partners, and particularly from our International Director for Programs and Partnerships, Adela Zayas, about the importance of resiliency in IPM's ongoing response to COVID-19. We first met Julie when she was serving with the Restorative Justice Program in St. Louis from some dear friends there, and then collaborated with her tangentially as she was Vice President of Programs at Focus St. Louis, and in her ongoing work with women. We're hoping that we can organize together a virtual immersion experience with my colleague, Vicki Jimenez, if not an in-person immersion experience in the future, amongst and specifically focused for women around the United States who are interested in topics such as developing resiliency and organizational development as well. So there's really no better person at this point to speak to us about where that direction might lead us and what we might be able to accomplish together as we imagine our ongoing presence in this new virtual reality that's still such a challenge for so many, but has led us to these wonderful forums that, frankly, we probably would have never imagined doing if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So I'm really pleased and honored to welcome Julie, who's a dear friend of my colleague Ilsa as well, and to have her join us for today's virtual forum. Again, we're live on Facebook and on Zoom, so I would ask you to mute yourself during Julie's presentation, and we'll be following the chat function, and you can also type in questions on the Facebook feed that we'll share with her at the conclusion of her presentation. So thank you again, Julie, for joining us. We all look forward to hearing from you from all of our little corners all over the world.
Well, thank you. And hello to everyone. I am coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. And if anyone doesn't know where that is, sometimes I get, well, that's in the States, right? Yes, in the States. And it is the home of Anheuser-Busch. So if you drink Busch beer, you know, who we are. That's what we're famous for. So that's about it. No, I'm kidding. A city in the Midwest. So we were talking weather before we logged on, and of course people are logging on from places where it's, you know, tropical and 80 degrees, and we're hopeful for 50, you know, it's, you know, so hopefully where you are it's beautiful as well. I have, as Joe said, I've been working in a variety of different fields, but they are sort of, tangentially related over the past 25 years. And Joe, you can call me old anytime because I figure I've earned every year. So anytime people say you're old, I say, yep, I am. And I'm proud of it. So I'm okay with that. Usually it's just my nieces saying that I'm old. But so when I look back on my career, really one thread through the whole thing was women. And where I started was I started actually in theater, believe it or not. I started in theater and music, and I really quickly got into some nonprofit work that was related to theater, to the arts. And I liked the nonprofit sector. I had, and I really enjoyed doing some of the work that I was doing, and that was in the Midwest also. And then I was the victim of a violent crime, and that sort of changed my trajectory. I moved back to St. Louis, and I at that point thought, okay, the world's a little bit different than I thought. In some ways it's not as hopeful as I thought it was, and it sort of made me a little more cynical, to be honest, about what my world was around me. And I thought, well, the best thing I can do is try to make it better. And so I got into working with a variety of different programs as a consultant, and I was really working on women's issues at that point, women and race issues of racial equity. And soon after that, the Crime Victim Center in St. Louis, which was the oldest crime victim center in America, had an opening for their executive director, for their president, for lack of a better word. And I applied for that position, got that position, and started down a very different road in my career, one that I'm really proud of, and was incredibly rewarding, probably the best work I've done. And so I worked for a little over 10 years with victims of violence. And of course, that you can't say that without understanding how that relates to women. Not that all of our victims were women. Certainly we worked with a lot of victims who were the victims were male, who were killed or stabbed or robbed, or fill in the blank, whatever the crime. But certainly looking at issues of sexual assault and domestic violence and all of these systemic issues that affect women in different ways than they affect men, and starting to understand and get a very deep appreciation for how that really does weave its way into some of the other issues women have in the world. And as I did that work, I, as Joe mentioned, got into a little bit of restorative justice. And so that just sort of, it just sort of morphed into different skill sets. And I was tapped about halfway through that process to run the Women in Leadership program in St. Louis. And that was an experiential deep dive into leadership for about 6 months for women who were in my program. And I did that for several years. I trained that program for several years. So here I was sort of in the social services, working with victims of violence, understanding how that systemically related to other women's issues of poverty or low education, or perhaps, how that then filtered in with race and equity and those issues. So all of these issues that we know are tangentially, related to one another. And as I started training that program, I was challenging the women to go into the community and ask the deep questions and find out the role that women had in fixing those problems, both in contributing to and fixing. Was there anything we were doing that we could be doing differently, but also how do we fix some of these social ills that we have, and how do we make it better for other women? And so that led to working with, I was the first executive director for the Women's Foundation here in St. Louis. And then was vice president at Focus St. Louis, which is a leadership development organization. While I was there, I was tapped to serve as the executive director for the Commission on Racial and Ethnic Fairness for the Supreme Court of Missouri. And so working with the Supreme Court, I now had a really clear, big picture understanding of how the systems really affect issues for women and families and people of color. And so it was, sort of a broad sweep, but I really started to understand the power that lies at the top, if you will, the way that policy, not to dismiss grassroots, but I had always been grassroots. And so now I was learning the power that you have on the other side of that equation. And so I worked with that project, got that off the ground, and thought, okay, I'm ready to go out on my own. And so for the last about 3 years, I have been running my own business called Reins Institute, which is REINS, like horse reins, not rain in the sky. And what I do is leadership development and coaching for women and well, for anyone, but I do have specific services for women. And what my goal is taking kind of what I've done in that career and helping people really think through their everyday issues, but with that lens of resilience around it. And so that's what Joe was referring to when I said I'm building resilient leaders. Part of what my constant story was not only my own story of figuring myself out and how to overcome trauma, but also how to help other people overcome trauma, then getting into the business world and saying, oh wow, there's actually trauma in the business world too. And and really starting to understand, no matter what corners of the world I went to, there were people that didn't know how to get up the next morning. And so that's part of the work that I do is a little bit further than that. Hopefully I'm getting them to work, not just out of bed. But once you're in the workplace, how are we coming back as an organization and adjusting to the changes around us, the world, allowing some of the problems that we have to not get us down, but rather use them as fuel for better progress later. And I just, I want to throw in there that I still do work with the Crime Victim Center on their board of directors and as well as in some of the issues of race equity in the St. Louis area. For those of you around the world, you may have remembered the Michael Brown shooting with Ferguson, Missouri, and a lot of what that kicked off in the world in terms of protests. And so, there's still a lot in my community that I'm involved in with that particular issue and help where I can. And so all of that's to say, along the way, someone came and said, what about women's entrepreneurship? And I realized I was a business owner and had never really thought about that. Had never thought about the fact that I was a woman in business. I was in business. I didn't think much of it. And at the time was running a nonprofit, but had helped start other organizations and other businesses. And I thought, oh, okay, well, yeah, maybe we should look at this. And there was a small group of women that was getting together at the time and understood that at least in the St. Louis economy, we were only 15% of the economic development. We meaning women-owned businesses. And we thought, wow, that's woefully small, given that we're 52% of the population. And so we did some work and some research, and long story short, got an organization together, and that just started a movement. And what we saw was that as we were starting this movement, so too were other people across the nation. So this would have been in the maybe 2012, 13 timeframe, so not too long ago, but enough long ago, enough years ago, that now we can see the progress we've made. And I will tell you, it's funny. I was thinking last night about some of the progress that has been made over the past few years and how remarkable it is, considering we haven't been at this very long. What that tells me, and what it tells me when we look at women in the workforce, which has really only been, depending on the country, the last 60, 70 years in large numbers, we've come a long way. And when we raise our voices, we have a lot of power. And what I've seen in the women's business movement in the last 10 years is indicative of what I think we're able to do anywhere if we really put our minds to it and just use our voices. I mean, we hold up half the sky, as the saying goes. And so, we're 50%.
Did she just freeze, or am I imagining it?
Yeah, I think she cut off, frozen.
Yeah, I think she'll rejoin. Technology.
Yeah. For those of you watching on, okay, for those watching on Facebook or Zoom,
Here we go.
This will all be available afterwards.
We're back.
Thank you.
We're back. Sorry. I should have only been down for a second. So let me share with you just kind of where we are at this point. I'm not going to throw too many statistics at you because that's boring and it's Friday. But when we look at where women are, we own 42% of the businesses, and that is that's in the US. Globally, it's 33%. So even globally, we own a third of the business endeavors that are happening. That has grown significantly in the last 10 years. Between, I think, 2014 and 19 or so, that went up about 20 to 25%, depending on the country. The reason for that is really, I would say it was social reasons, but it's not. It's because we got our voices in line. And we started this kind of groundswell movement of saying, hey, listen to us. We are viable business partners and we're viable business owners. And we started putting ourselves out there and saying, why aren't you investing in us? And why aren't you giving us resources? And the power of that is what we're seeing now, which is incredible growth. If we're at 42% in America, we're almost at 50%. And really, that should be our goal. If we're half the population, I'd love to see us own half the businesses. That makes sense. And so I think we're getting there. Being 33% globally, again, needs a little bit more push, but we're getting there. The thing that is really changing is, and this is maybe more relevant in America than it might be in other countries, but the number of minority-owned businesses. So specifically, what we know the numbers around are Native Americans, African Americans, or the Black population, the Latina population, and the Asian American population. Those four categories have grown. I think it was, let me look at my number, 45% in the last 8 years. So they are really kicking it up and starting to start businesses and really seeding the women-owned business economy. And the reason that's important, we know diversity is important. And so I certainly want to reiterate that. But the reason for me that this is so important is really a practical reason. And that's that if we can catch up the amount of money that's going into the economy from white women-owned businesses, if we catch everybody else up, we add roughly $918 billion into the economy, and we add millions of jobs. I think it's 4 million jobs that we add into the economy if those things are equalized. And so that's something just to think about in terms of how we go about supporting women entrepreneurs is how do we get them into the community and support them in a way that everybody has access to the same thing, because ultimately that gives us a better bottom line. That's where we're really going to see the economic growth. And I don't want to make it all about money, but the reason that I do oftentimes is because we tend to look at money as a negative thing. And until we have it, then it's a really good thing. No. We all want more of it, but we think of it as negative. What I'm not driving is a materialist. It buys us the resources we need to be a better community. And what we see in women in communities with a high number of women-owned businesses is they reinvest that money into their community. In fact, the communities that have the highest percentage of, and usually the threshold is about 40%, if you have 40% or more women-owned businesses in your community, you have the highest social well-being and you have the highest growth revenue in your community. And those two things shouldn't be separated. We shouldn't misunderstand that money really does equate in many cases to social well-being, because most women do reinvest into their communities. So one of the things that I'm looking for when I'm wanting to support women entrepreneurship is what is the impact that business is having in the community to make jobs, to employ women who are underemployed or unemployed, to create opportunities for education, particularly in developing countries. That's a really important piece of it is that education goes along with whether mom worked or had an education. And so for young girls, the education factor is tied to entrepreneurship and to at least to employment, if not to entrepreneurship. And so I'm looking for ways that we can boost that support system for these women as they are trying to figure out what's next in their path. There's a few challenges that I want to bring up just to get us thinking about what needs to change. One of them is how we invest in women-owned businesses. I can give you the numbers in America. I don't know them globally as well as I do the American numbers, but in America, we're half the population, as I said, that's globally. We are roughly 40% of the business world, but we get only a third of the investment money for startups. And so as we're starting businesses, people are not investing in women-owned businesses. Well, they are, but at a rate of a third less than our male counterparts. Here's why this bugs me most. Because studies show we outperform them by 30% across the board, across the globe. We outperform, and when we start a business, for 5 years running, we have 30% better revenue than our male business owners do. And yet they're only investing in us at a third of the price. And so that's something to think about in terms of that inequity that they can look at that. We can give them the numbers and say, but look how well we do. We're doing 30%. We started a tech company, and Joe started a tech company, and sorry, Joe, I'm outperforming you by 30%. So they need to be thinking about this in terms of capital investment. The other thing that women tend, not the performance piece of it, but the number of small businesses that are started by women that make less than $100,000, and that's US dollars a year. Dollars sounds like a lot, but when you're employing people, it's not. And so the fact that we have so many women-owned businesses making less than that, they can point to two things. One is the funding issue I just mentioned, that they don't get the money to get off the ground and really scale up like they need to, because the money's not there to do that. But the second reason is the reason why women start businesses. It's not always the same motivation as a man. And of course, these statements that I'm making do not apply all the way across the board. You know, there are always exceptions, but
again, for all of you on Facebook and Zoom, we're having a little trouble with the feed, but we will get this going again with Julie as soon as possible. And it's kind of funny that it happens in St. Louis and it doesn't happen in India. But we'll make this happen and be able to follow. You'll be able to follow up directly on Facebook afterwards, and the Zoom recording is always available to anyone who would like to listen to that. Looks like she's quite frozen this time. Oh, I'm just going to dial back in, I'm assuming. Ilse, you're muted, but I think, yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully she'll call back in just a second.
I wasn't going to make any sarcastic comments about male efficiency and whose screen is frozen and whose isn't. So. It's so crazy how this happens.
I know.
Really a shame.
Oh, here she goes.
Okay, great.
hi.
Welcome
Hello
back.
again.
Sorry. So
Welcome back.
Here's what's happening. I'm on my phone, and I'm not going to get off my phone because my computer will not keep me online. So
Yeah, you're good. You're good. We've had this happen before, and in fact, yesterday we had the same situation with someone with a bad computer but good phone. So
gotcha. Okay. So here we go. I'm back. I'm going to keep going. So where I was leaving off is basically we have the necessity people who are starting businesses because they have to. They don't have other options for employment. The next piece, the next group is the flexibility group, and this is probably larger, and that's a global phenomena also, and that's women who need to start businesses because we don't have the flexibility to manage our families and our lives with the traditional 9-to-5 or whatever the country's social norms are around the workday. And so we tend to start companies more because we need the flexibility of being able to leave when we need to go pick up kids or take kids to the doctor or what have you. And so we're trying to manage our lives, really. And so we start a business for that reason. What that means is we're not setting the same goals as our male counterparts in terms of income. We are setting a goal of, I have to make ends meet, or I have to support my family, which is a different goal than I'm going to start a company and my goal is to make as much money as I can. So we're not setting our goals as high as we could. The second reason is we don't believe in ourselves as much. And there's good reason for that, meaning we just don't have as much experience in the workplace. So we certainly don't have the longevity to say, oh, yeah, I can do this. Other women have done this. I saw so-and-so do this, where men had those role models. And so we're just now figuring out that we are capable of much more than we thought that we were. And so as we're moving into understanding ourselves a little bit better, hopefully that piece will get better. But those two things contribute to the fact that we tend to start businesses for really practical reasons versus starting them because we truly have a burning desire to be an entrepreneur. And that's not wrong. It just means that we have to then decide if we want to set different goals for our future. that are a little bit more financially based, or at least community based in what we're doing. And I'm gonna add a couple more things and then open up for questions, because I know, there's a piece of today that we want to do. We want to spend some time answering questions, and I'll stay online this time so we don't have that problem. But as we think about how to support women going forward, here's what the research shows us. The number one thing, besides capital investment, that's actually number one. And by capital investment, we mean the number of dollars going into women-owned businesses to help them scale up, that the investors or government grants, or however it works, but they need that money to get the business up and running. But the most important social thing that we need is they need support systems. We know that women's networks work. So programs that put women business owners together, allow them to share best practices and resources, allow them to support each other. I have a group of women I do this with who, it's not uncommon for me to call and say, I don't know how to price my services, or I don't know how to sell something, or to call and just cry and say, I'm just stressed, listen to me. So that's important for us. And we are social creatures. And so it's very important for us to have that kind of social connection. And the research shows that that's actually the number one thing we can be doing to support women. It's that simple. It's just giving us networks. We do have programs like that. I run women's growth groups for business owners, as well as just women, no matter if they own a business or not. But there's other programs for entrepreneurs, and they're expensive. And so women don't have the money to pay for them. So what we also need to be doing is, as we're setting up these networks, to make sure that there's the investment available to make it affordable for them, either free or affordable for them to get together and discuss these things. We need to support women-owned business policies. And so again, you saw the power of the voice of women to step up in the last 10 years and say, hey, where's my share? I deserve, we deserve a piece of this pie. And when they did step up into that space, people listened and they responded. And so we need to keep driving that. We need to keep supporting women-owned businesses and policies in government, but also in within our funding mechanisms and in our communities. And then finally, this sounds simple, but support women-owned businesses by buying from them. The more that we are able to sell in our communities, the more, first of all, the more we grow and stay stable. But the second thing we're able to do with that is set the example for other women that, yes, you can start fill in the blank kind of business and be successful and not have to fear that you're going to shut down sooner than maybe your male counterpart would have. And so as we are setting up these companies, trusting that women know how to run them, that we have the resources, mentally and physically to run these companies and to do well with them, and to believe in that process. And so all of that, as I just sort of wrap this up, I threw a lot at you, but the reason I wanted to do that is I really wanted to give you a good foundation of what women are facing across the board in terms of entrepreneurship challenges, but also, the need for support. The support is really easy. It's actually a really easy thing we can be doing. And to encourage any of you out there who, to either buy from women-owned businesses, or at least think about how to help support that. Because what we see in the communities where they are is, we see a much greater social impact. We see better housing, better schools, better social systems in places where there's a high rate of entrepreneurship for women. So I think with that, I don't know if I have any other. Oh, actually, you know what? I did write this down. I do want to congratulate Mexico, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, because women there start more businesses than men. In those 4 countries, you guys are rocking it. So congratulations. So Joe, I'll turn it over to questions if that's okay. And I can talk more. I'll turn it over to questions.
No, thank you so much, Julie. Could you say those 4 countries again?
Yeah, it's Mexico, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines.
So not El Salvador, India, Nepal, or Kenya,
sorry.
where I think we have people on from.
Nope, sorry.
Were there any factors in identifying why those 4 countries did so well that you're aware of?
No, Not that I could see, other than the governments. I did find, at least in Mexico and in Vietnam, the governments do have really good programs in terms of seeding money into women-owned businesses. So they grants and things like that. Or, here in America, we have what's called a Women-Owned Business Enterprise Distinction. It's an application or certification that we get through application that allows us to apply for government grants and contracts more often. It's a really difficult process. And so I think it's prohibitive in America, but I think they have figured out in Mexico and Vietnam how to do that well. I don't know that they call it the same thing, but I think it's something similar where they have access to applying for particular contracts.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. It's really ironic for those of you who haven't been joining us the last few forums. We've had a number of conversations about this theme of resiliency in particular. And as I mentioned earlier, our Director of Programs and Partnerships, Adela Zayas, has spoken about that. And then yesterday, in conjunction with, or in collaboration with Aneta and Vicky, who are both on this call. Julie, so Vicky is the Director of our educational programs, but particularly the virtual immersion experience program. And Aneta is responsible for research and resource mobilization. And they're both in El Salvador. And to pat IPM, I guess, and our board a little bit on the back, they're both now part of the leadership team. So the leadership team of IPM is now majority female and majority non-US, which are really good steps. But I'm just wondering if any of them, yesterday we presented at the University of Maine on this topic, sort of in response to what we've learned in relation to COVID-19. And I'm just wondering if any of the three of them would like to add anything before I open this up more broadly. I know that they as well have some issues with camera and bandwidth from El Salvador right now, but I want to just give that a minute or pause for a minute to see if any of them, Aneta, Vicky, or
while they're getting on, and please interrupt me, ladies, when you're able to get on. But I'll just fill the gap for a second and say I didn't talk about the impact of COVID, but certainly that's because it's not gender specific necessarily, but I think if anything, it in some cases it encouraged some women to start businesses who have lost jobs or found that they needed a different kind of job to be able to stay home with their children who are now schooling from home. But certainly, that I'm sure that it scared a lot of us too. And so I do know a handful of women who took this time to actually craft a business plan and to start a business. In fact, I know more of them than I know people who said, "Oh, well, I'm not starting a business in this economy." So I'm hoping that that's the outcome, is that we will see more women-owned businesses, and seeing them in that, and that is their own resilience, as they're saying, I can't meet my needs or meet the needs of my family, but with the job that I have, or I lost my job from the pandemic, and so I'm going to do it. I'm going to go out on my own.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree that anecdotally, it would certainly seem that more women in response to the pandemic both have started their own businesses, and I would hope employers, be they men or women, are more open to women having greater flexibility in their work life, which obviously makes it easier for them to juggle what women often have to juggle in their day-to-day. Adela, Nate, or Vicky, did you have anything you wanted to, or you'd like to add at this point, or that resonates well with you from what Julie had to say in our discussion?
Yes, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Julie for providing us with your time, and for being so persistent. I know that sometimes technology can be our best friend, or sometimes an important enemy. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation, and this is maybe a little bit looking forward to the future, but just as Joe was saying, we are developing some virtual immersion experiences, and one of them is based on gender equity. So I would love if we can maybe meet up later, and I would love to chat with you about it, if that's okay with you, of course.
Absolutely. In fact, I know we talked about, when Joe was in St. Louis last, we had talked about putting together a women's group a women's trip for either for gender equity or even for just women's leadership and meeting with other teams of women across the world. And then the pandemic hit. I want to say we might have gone 3 or 4 months and then the pandemic hit. And so we just didn't get it off the ground, but we intended to. So yes, let's talk.
Thank you. Perfect. And I also was wondering a little bit. I think at the beginning, I had some issues as well at the beginning, but I did catch you saying something about art involved. So I was wondering if you could maybe.
Oh, just in terms of my background. So my background, actually, my degree, my first degree, I have 3, but the first one was, the first 2, I should say, were in theater and in mass communications. So more like television production, working in acting and theater and singing and things like that. And so when I say arts, I didn't mean visual art, but arts as in collectively, as in an arts background. And what I was saying is the first jobs that I had out of college were in radio, and then I did, radio and acting and television in that realm, if you will. And then I got into a nonprofit that was arts related. What it was a symphony. And so I was the executive director of a symphony at 23, which was way too young. And so when I say arts, just that's, and that may be more of an American term that we say arts, but we're talking about anything within the creative sphere. So yeah. So no, I wish I was an artist. I wish I was good at drawing and painting. And actually, you know what I wish I was good at is sculpting. I'm fascinated by sculpting, but I'm not good at it.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'd like to open it up to anyone else who has any comments or questions they'd like to add. There's a little bit of a dialogue going on right now on Facebook as well that I've been keeping my eye on. I'm sorry, I keep.
Okay. No, that's great.
So I was kind of.
Yeah, go ahead, Natalie.
I was curious, all of the statistics and stuff that you've talked about as far as women-owned businesses, how many of those do you know are really in like economically disadvantaged areas?
Probably not many. And that's anecdotally. I don't know the breakdown. The fact that we have seen such growth in particular subsectors tells me that we were not there before, in some of the communities we needed to be in. But in terms of the actual number I don't know. Here's why I presume not many. Number one, because we are seeing growth in particular subsectors. And by that, more along racial lines, but certainly also along young women versus older women starting businesses, things like that. But what's really driving my assumption that we are probably not as strong in poverty or growing communities is because I see a lot of programs in those areas trying to implement that. And I would think that, just from a feasibility perspective, these organizations who have, and I mean, I know of one in St. Louis who's dumped millions into this. So meaning I think they wouldn't do that without having done the research to say, we really are lacking in these communities. And we're in St. Louis isn't rare with that. There's, I know there's a huge one in Boston and New York, and a few of the universities in California are seeding some of these things. And so as we're seeing these programs popping up and it's, when I say to seed entrepreneurship, it's very specific to a particular community, particular neighborhood or community, or subsector of women, whether it be women of color or women with disabilities or what have you. So I think that the kind of attention and money being put into that is telling that we really lack in those areas. That's my assumption. So
thanks.
There's I'm not sure, Ilsa, did I interrupt a question you wanted to ask? I had another one come through. So.
Go ahead, Joe. I can jump in after.
Okay. This one is related to how do IPM's project partners compare, or are any of the regional staff, international staff, project partners that are on Zoom or following us on Facebook, how would you compare your experience as a woman yourself or working with women and girls to what Julie has shared? And anybody certainly feel free to jump in.
Can I say something in my experience of working with women and women's projects? I think one of the things, concerns that we have always had, and I personally have had, is that we have plenty of programs in India, in the nonprofit world, which teach women how to save. But growth is an area which is never taught, very rarely taught. So you have large-scale saving groups all over the country, and nonprofits especially focus on that. But it's the for-profit world which benefits from the savings that poor women do, you know, because the savings is applied to growth, but not the growth of their women and their businesses. So it's just an observation and a comment that it would make a critical difference to bring in the for-profit experiences, some of which you're sharing, and to introduce it into our program. So just a comment on that.
That's helpful, Mahesh. Thank you. Anyone else or with a different perspective or added perspective?
Ironically, Joe, your question was what I was going to comment as well.
Well, it wasn't my question, but it, yeah, it's online.
Well, there were, I know when Julie and I were talking earlier this week, I mean, it's just so obvious, both from whether it's in the US or globally. I mean, these are parallel issues that affect women. And I know through IPM's work and with our partners, most of whom are women-led, community-based organizations that work as collaboratives and support each other, you know, the positive impact that they've been able to see in terms of their own success in growing businesses as entrepreneurs, in developing their communities with better education and healthcare and all of that. So I know a lot really resonated today with Julie's comments about the support networks that IPM has in place to continue to allow our partners to gather together, whether it's through regional conferences and share best practices and challenges and support each other, whether it's the bilateral or multilateral sharing that they do. These are so critical, and it really does make a difference. And Julie, thank you again for sharing your time with us. We are so grateful to you. You may not feel that you have much talent as a sculptor, but we know your talents are very extensive, and you continue to help raise voices for women and inspire and encourage the success. So hopefully we'll catch up to the 50-50 percentage that we need to grow.
Thank you.
Julie, there's a question. I'm just looking, and I mean, I hope this isn't too personal or too difficult to answer, but someone is asking in relation to, we've seen the rise, you know, obviously a great rise in gender-based violence during the pandemic, not only in the US, but around the world. And given your own reference, I'm paraphrasing here, to trauma or having having had that experience, how do you see, or could you say a little bit more about the intersection, if you will, of I don't know if it's the right way to put it, gender-based violence and women's entrepreneurship? That seems a little abrupt.
No, it's okay.
They're interrelated.
Sure. Are they interrelated? It depends on the individual. I do think that some women certainly make the decision to perhaps start their own businesses or grow their businesses or change their businesses based on certainly personal experiences like that. My experience was a sexual assault, and Joe knows I don't have any problem saying that out loud. I do speak, I do vocalize that. I didn't say it here, you know, just in my introduction, simply because it wasn't relevant necessarily to what we were saying, except to explain my background. But the reason why I don't shy away from saying that is because we have to lift the taboo for women about that subject. We have got to stop treating sexual assault as something that we have to be ashamed of versus the perpetrator of that assault. And so over time, I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm not going to go into a lot of details or, you know, try to make people uncomfortable with it, but I'm certainly not going to shy away from saying that was the crime that happened. Did it affect my views on entrepreneurship? You bet, because And it really came from that resiliency perspective, from the empowerment perspective. And what I wanted was women to feel like they had control of their lives. Certainly what it instilled in me over a certain amount of time, and it was about 15 years that this happened. It sort of had to marinate in me for a little bit. But what I found myself doing was coming out fiercely against some of the social issues that cause such violence, whether it be the way we understand masculinity, or the way that violence permeates in particular communities of poverty or of other challenges. And I found myself just becoming this fierce warrior, if you will. Like I feel this sort of fireball in me about it, and I want to do what I can to help. And so, when I'm looking at how I run my business, absolutely, it's woven in with an undertow of how do I build strong people and how do I build strong women, so that we are building a society in the workplace, which drives a lot of what we do at home. It just does. I don't want to dismiss the impact of what we do for our work on what we have going on at home. And because that drives a lot of what's happening at home and our schedules and our lives, I think we're missing a huge piece of it if we don't go into the workplace and build the same kind of systems in the workplace that we're trying to build in society, which is to say, be a good person, be a caring person, challenge what kind of challenges that lead us to violent behavior. And so all the time, what I'm doing is trying to get people to communicate better, to handle problems better, and to resolve these issues, and to be better versions of themselves, so that we are dismantling that past of violence and of behavior that leads us down that path. And so, yeah, they're sort of two different things. Do they cross over in my world? Every single day. Yes, they do every single day. And I think there's a lot of women like me who have come out of an experience like that. You come out either softly or you come out roaring, and neither is right or wrong. It's just who you are personally. And when you come out roaring, watch out, because we're starting businesses and we're making noise. So it's so yes, tangentially related, but yes, related.
Thank you for sharing that. And I just, so important to be talking more openly as we can about this, given what happened in Atlanta.
Yes.
Especially again this week, in the way that Asian and Pacific Islander women are being targeted again and again and again in this nation. There's some other questions, just another comment from Bindia, and from Vicky, and I'll let you and Julie work directly on that. Julie, not only has Vicky developed, as she mentioned, thematic immersion or geographic immersions, but these thematic immersions, we're in the midst of one coming up with a local Jesuit university in Cleveland, John Carroll, around caste. But she's really excited to talk to you a little bit more about gender equity and how that could be worked into a virtual immersion, but also to learn more about issues related to racial equity and racial justice, given your background in St. Louis, which you shared, and I've shared a little bit with her in the chat.
Absolutely.
Sorry, anyone else? I'm just looking.
Joe, I wanted to thank Julie for her presentation, and I just wondered what type of businesses women start. Are they different than what men start?
Yes, they are. And I will tell you that some of the reason I think for why we're not getting the investment in our businesses that we need, because most of the investors are male. And so they're looking at, if we're starting a storybook, and this is a real example, we're starting a company that makes storybooks for school children as educational tools, they may not see the social value of that and want to invest in that. So if the majority of the investors are male, they're looking at infrastructure things. So here's something that is not empirically true, because again, this is a gross stereotype. But what we do see in terms of trends is women will start socially minded businesses and men will start structural businesses. So they're looking at tech and construction and engineering and things like that, or sometimes healthcare. We're looking at more of the softer side of things, of the things that are going to build good social systems. That is not always true by any stretch of the imagination, but by and large, we kind of see them fall into those pockets. And so we don't get as much investment on a company who, who may be dealing with with social emotional wellness versus dealing with physical wellness, for example. That would be a good example. We might see more investment in physical wellness. So I think it's shifting a little bit, but we certainly are seeing more women go into the sciences and into tech and into construction and manufacturing. In fact, a lot of women are going into manufacturing, at least in the US, because of what I talked about before, that certification for women business enterprises. If you have that certification, you get a lot more contracts. And so a lot of the manufacturing firms are either being started by women or they're tapping a woman and saying, hey, lead us, because we need you. So it just depends on the industry, but by and large, yes, we are starting different kinds of businesses. And I think, and then that also depends on the country as well, how that differs. But by and large, yeah, I think we lean a little bit more on the social side of things, and men lean more on the structural side. And so, it just depends on what people want to invest in and what they want to buy.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can squeeze in one more question or comment if anyone has one they'd like to add. Thank you all again. I know there's a bit of a delay. I want to thank everyone again for their participation in today's virtual forum. This has really been one of the highlights of this difficult time we've all been living through in relation to the pandemic and the racial reckoning, and certainly issues related, as we saw again this week. And I was reminded in our conversation with a colleague, Alyssa Bovell, about the real, I think pandemic is the only way to put it, in the rise of gender-based violence around the world over the course of the last year. It's always been at the heart of IPM's mission from the very founding. One of our first partners was composed in kind of a patriarchal way of the spouses of the founders, became a project partner for Lutheran women and their engagement in international development work. And those are certainly shoulders that we continue to lean into and lean on and stand on, as they say, quite literally, in the case of Sammy and Versil and Bernie and so many others. So we're thrilled to have had Julie with us and to have this ongoing connection with the community in St. Louis. I want to remind you that next week, as I mentioned earlier, Bindia Makwana, our newest colleague, a fellow with IPM, if you will, in our South Asia office, will be joining us. She will speak about the women of Golana and surrounding villages. For those of you who don't know, many of those women are Dalits or of other even lower non-caste status in India, if you will, and speak specifically about their resiliency, past and present, and the work they are doing collectively in preparing a future generation, with a particular focus on the young girls that Bindia has been such an inspiration for and continues to mentor in her own work in that community. We will also then, I want to draw your attention to the fact that the following Friday will be a holiday for all of us at IPM. For many people during the Passover and Easter season, it's just not a convenient time to gather. So we'll be gathering again the following Friday, which, if my calendar is correct, will be April
Joe, I think you're muted.
Did I just mute now, or is that everything I just say was muted? Sorry.
We didn't hear the date.
Okay, so I was thanking Julie profusely and acknowledging how important it is for all of us to remain connected to the St. Louis community, given our history there, and particularly the really strong women like Sammy Mayer and Bernie Marquardt, Versil Strage, Mary Helwig, et cetera, who were really, a part of this organization since its founding, and on whom we still rely deeply, and shoulders we stand on, as the phrase goes. Next Friday, you didn't hear this, I guess, again, we'll be joined by Bindia Makwana, who's our newest, the newest member of the IPM International staff, serving as a fellow in the South Asia office. And Bindia, in a quite relevant way, will be speaking about the women of Golana and the surrounding villages, a largely Dalit community, and their resilience, both past and present, in their work, in the work they are doing collectively in preparing a future generation. And Bindia is really just a remarkable mentor and someone that so many girls, and when we talk about Golana, we're talking tens of thousands of girls probably look up to for the work that she's doing in her community. So we're thrilled that she'll be able to join us next Friday at the same time, 11 o'clock Eastern. And we apologize to those of you on the West Coast and in Latin America for whom that's continues to be rather early. The following Friday, April 2nd, we will not be gathering in recognition of the Passover and Easter holiday, but we will gather again starting on Friday, April 9th, as we look forward to IPM's anniversary celebration coming up on May 10th. So again, I just want to thank Julie for her remarkable work, her sharing with us today, and the inspiration she continues to be for so many. And we'll look forward, I know Vicki in particular will look forward to following up with you in the coming days about how we might further our collaboration together. So thank you, Julie. Thank you everyone for being with us today. And may the peace that passes all understanding be with you this weekend.
Thank
You as
you.
well. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.